At some point, you're going to need to get your RAW files out of Camera Raw and into Photoshop. Here's how to do it while retaining the greatest flexibility and the highest image quality. I've got here in my Camera Raw dialog box the image Newfoundland selected. Now if your Camera Raw dialog box is not open with all of these images from the previous lessons, you can find Newfoundland in the Chapter 8 folder and simply open that. Now with this RAW file, what I would like to do is move it into Photoshop so I could add some text to this and make it part of a layout. Down here at the bottom of the image, we see a listing of the color space, the bit depth, and the size of the image. If we simply click, that brings up our workflow options dialog. Now this controls exactly how the image will show up inside Photoshop. Right now it's a RAW file, but we have options to choose the color space that it will open up with in Photoshop. We could set it to ProPhoto if we want to make sure that we are capturing the maximum number of possible colors in this image. For a bit depth, if we're going to do any editing to the image in Photoshop, other than just adding layers to it with type, things like that, we'd probably want to have a 16-bit image set. Here we're just adding type, so let's leave this to 8-bit. That'll give us a much smaller file size. We can choose the size here. Now the size will automatically default to the camera sensor's native resolution. You can see options here with a minus sign and with the plus sign. The plus options are upsampling your image, so you could have a larger image, and the minus sizes will be downsampling your image. I think for here we'll simply leave it at its default, but this is nice and handy to have here if you know that you're going to be working with a small image in the beginning. You can save yourself some time by opening a smaller sized image in Photoshop, but we'll leave this here at the default setting. We can choose the resolution that we want the image to have. I'll leave it here at the default at 240 is going to work well for us, but you could change this to any value that you like. And we even have sharpening options here. We can set sharpening for screen, and we have choices for low, standard, and high sharpening. So if this image is destined for screen output, let's say it's going on the web or as part of some multimedia presentation, we would select screen here as our choice and choose a standard sharpening. If we're ultimately going to be printing this, if we're printing on glossy paper, we can select glossy paper and again choose from low, standard, and high amounts. With this, I think we can set the sharpening to screen here. We're not going to be printing this image out. But here's the option that I really want to spend some time talking about. Open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. Now when you have a smart object, the great thing about it is you have the flexibility to go back at any point and reopen the original file. So we're going to check this option, and once I do that, you're going to notice that down here the Open Image button is going to change. I'm going to press OK. Now instead of Open Image, we have Open Object. Now if we press this, the image will be opened up as a smart object inside Photoshop, and that's going to give us some great advantages in terms of flexibility. So let's simply press Open Object. And now we're inside Photoshop, and notice we have our Smart Object icon here in the Layers panel. Now let's add some type to this. I'm going to choose the Type tool by pressing T on the keyboard. And I've got a typeface here selected at a fairly large point size. Now this is just for demonstration, so you can use any font you want at any size. I'm going to simply type in here, let's see, and that's our first layer. I'll hit the Enter key to commit to that. And let's see, I'll type something down here. Okay, so we've got two type layers. We can move them individually by selecting the Move tool. We can drag them around. Let's bring this down over here. And of course we could alter the typeface and size at will. But suppose we realize that after bringing in this raw file, we've forgotten to address a couple of important issues. I'm going to switch to the Marquee tool here, and I'm going to open the Info panel. You'll notice that I have blown out highlights. The RGB values up in that Info panel are all reading 255. Now because it's no longer a raw file, I can't go and do highlight recovery, but because I have opened this as a smart object, I can go back easily to the raw file state, make a change, and have it automatically update into this layout. And I do that simply by selecting the image layer in Newfoundland and double clicking. That brings me right back into Camera Raw. Now what I can do here in Camera Raw, if I turn my highlight clipping preview on, I can see my blown out highlights. I'm going to drag the recovery slider and get rid of those nicely. And suppose while I'm here, I say, well, you know what, this sky is a little bit too pale blue. It's going to clash with the type that I've selected. I'm going to go up and choose my targeted adjustment tool and choose the tool for luminance. That brings up our HSL panel, and luminance is open right here. If I simply click and drag down on the sky area, the sky is going to get darker. Now suppose I want to boost the saturation of that sky in addition to bringing the brightness down. I can simply go up to my targeted adjustment tool, select saturation, and I'm going to click on the sky and boost that saturation up. Okay, let's zoom in here. At 100%, and let's say that I need to add some grain here just so this image area doesn't feel flat. I'm going to go and click on the Effects tab and simply add some grain in here. Not too much, just enough to give it a little bit of body. Bring the roughness down just a hair, and we'll do that. Now, notice that I have an OK button here. If I press OK, we're going to go back into Photoshop and watch what happens. Our smart object now has, with our changes, we've got a darker, richer sky in here. If I zoom in at 100% here, you can see that we've got some nice grain in here. So by opening the file as a smart object, at any point I can go back to the original raw file, make changes, and have those applied automatically to this image in Photoshop. And by making these changes to the raw file, I get much higher quality results and have options available to me in the Camera Raw interface that I simply would not have if I worked on the image in its rendered state inside